Hello chickens, hello people on the internet. Starting off talking YouTube videos is so hard for me. What do I say? Okay, so today we are going to be talking about prayer, and the reason that I want to talk about prayer is because it is everywhere on my social media platforms at the moment because of the virus, right? We're all so sick of talking about the virus. I know. It reminded me of the issues that I have with prayer. Now, for those of you who haven't seen my deconversion video, it's just a few videos down on my channel and you can watch that if you want to know a little bit more of my background. But essentially, I was a Christian for 23 years of my life. I was very involved in my faith, in my community, and I deconverted, and that's what that video is about. Part of my frustrations with my faith came directly from my relationship with prayer, and the more that I thought about prayer and the effectiveness of prayer, the more I actually questioned whether there was someone on the other side, and especially whether that person on the other side was all-knowing, all-loving, good, and able to achieve anything. I want to start this video off by saying I don't want to seem like I'm talking down to people who pray. As I said, I was a Christian for a very long time and until recently, and I prayed every single day. I've talked to a few of my Christian friends and I know that they do gain a lot of insight and sense of peace from prayer. I would agree with that. There were times in my own prayer life where I gained knowledge or insight over a particular topic, and also times where I experienced a lot of peace and just an overwhelming sense of calm when I did pray. I do want to just point out that prayer does help a lot of people in that sense, and there's even a Bible verse to back that up. It is Philippians 4 verses 6 and 7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with all thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and mind in Christ Jesus. I used to reflect on that Bible verse a lot, especially when I was feeling anxious, and I found that it often did give me a sense of peace, believing that I was communicating with the divine and that that person deeply cared about me and that that person had a plan and that there was a meaning for the things going on in my life, right? That did give me a sense of peace. So in my mind, prayer can be very useful for an individual to refocus, to just center, to have that moment of quiet. This is not unique just to Christianity. Obviously, there are so many different philosophies of thought, religions that incorporate different types of meditation into their worship or into their daily lives. And we can see now through scientific studies that certain forms of meditation are actually incredibly good for your own mental health. To me, this wisdom in the Bible about sitting and reflecting and even giving thanks, so, listing off the things that you're grateful for and saying out loud the things that you're worrying about, those are all things that I've actually learnt in therapy with a psychologist, a secular psychologist. Obviously, as well, if you believe that there is a grander purpose to life and that God is all loving and caring and listening to every single word, of course that will give you a sense of hope and security, especially in times like this with a pandemic. In that sense, I do kind of miss prayer. I guess I miss believing that there was a purpose, I guess a divine purpose I should say, because I do believe that there are purposes and reasons that things happen. For example, the virus is happening because someone ate one of those cute little, what are they called? Armadillos? No. A divine purpose was comforting because it sort of took the pressure off of myself to implement any big changes, I guess, in my life, because I knew that, or I believed that God had a handle on things and that He would sort of sort things out. We live in a time and it's even expected now. It's sort of a normal part of life to have your claim and then have evidence to substantiate that claim. And the resources and tools that we have now mean it's really easy for us to collect information, to analyze that information and that data, and then to do something with that data. We might be able to find correlations or causations between certain things and certain events, for example. And so in my mind, when it comes to prayer, I think it's really important that we look at the claims that the Bible makes about prayer and that people make about prayer, and sort of collect it, analyze it, and see if it actually does what people say it does. So in saying that, I'm actually going to be diving into the Bible today. This is kind of crazy for me because I haven't read the Bible like this and actually collected verses and put them together and thought about them in probably about 6 months. So first, how about we look at a few things that Jesus himself says about prayer, and I'm just going to read them out for you. In Mark 11 verses 22 to 24, Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart, but believes what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." Again, he says in Matthew 21:22, "If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer." In Luke 11:13, he says, "If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts," that's a bit of sassy Jesus there, "know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give the Holy Spirit to those who ask him?" John 14 verse 13, "And I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son." And then the last one I have is Luke 1:37, "For nothing will be impossible with God." So if we know anything about Jesus, is that he says a lot of kind of crazy things, right? And he tends to use what I believe to be hyperbole to give weight to the things that he says. So for example, with that moving the mountains things, like that's insane, right? No one has ever done that. That would be very easy to prove if someone had done that just by praying. So no one's done that. He also said things like chop off your hand if it causes you to sin. So with the mountains one, I am willing to, for the sake of the argument, say that he's not being literal when he says that you can move mountains with your faith. But what he is, I think, trying to emphasize is that you can do amazing things through prayer and through faith. And he says something similar. If I find the verse, I'll put it up on the screen. He says something similar to his disciples when he is being taken up into heaven. What's that called? What was that called when he went up to heaven? Anyway, it's just like going up to heaven. He says to his disciples, the miracles they've seen Jesus do, they're going to do even greater miracles in his name. And let's just remind people what kind of miracles Jesus did. He turned water into wine, he raised Lazarus from the dead, he healed sick people, and he raised himself from the dead as well. So those are pretty amazing things, and he said that the disciples, through their faith and through their prayer, were going to be able to do even greater things. And some people believe that that isn't just for the 12 disciples that he gave that encouragement to, but that it also actually carries on for Christians nowadays. If this is true, if Jesus is God and he's telling the truth, we should be seeing people raised from the dead. We should be seeing people miraculously healed, limbs growing back. There is no limit. Literally it says, "For nothing is impossible with God." There is no limit to what we should see being done. I know a lot of Christians. I was a Christian. I never saw anyone raised from the dead. I never saw someone get healed from anything in a way that could only be explained as miraculous. If we're remembering the ways that Jesus healed people, many times it was very instant. So for example, the girl who was sick and died, he placed his hands over her and she was alive again. We're not talking about someone who's been in hospital for ages and then eventually gets better through the help of medications, and look, God answered our prayers and she's better. We're talking about healings that happen on the spot. Otherwise, you're just giving God credit for something that doctors did, right? James 5:16 says that the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. Again, the words like power and effective, we're talking about things that will make people look at what has happened and then go, that can't be anything but God. Again, if we think about the miracles of Jesus, so many people looked at what he did and they were like, there's no way I can explain that. A blind man is seeing after Jesus put his spit and mud on his eyes. Those are the kinds of things that I would still be expecting to see today if the claims of the Bible are true. If nothing else, we should be able to see that places with a high percentage of Christians should be healthier, they should be more prosperous, less mental illnesses due to the power of prayer, right? Some people might point towards the prosperity of the West to being the fact that God is with us, or that there is a higher majority of Christians in the West. There are a lot of Christians in China. There's a lot of Christians in the Middle East. We're not seeing the same amounts of prosperity in those places. Is it because those Christians are not as righteous? When it comes to explaining the prosperity of the West, I'm less likely to think that it is because of prayer or because of God being with us than it is to do with a few things that I learned through my history degree, such as the fact that coal deposits were close to the surface in Britain, which led to them having the Industrial Revolution, which meant that it was easier for them to enslave and abuse other people to work for them and to take over other lands and countries. I would be very cautious to thank God for the prosperity of the West when we actually have quite a dark history when it comes to using and abusing other people to get where we are. So how about then when people do say that they have had an experience or an encounter with God, or they have witnessed a miraculous healing, or something that they at least couldn't explain any other way? What about those kinds of stories, those anecdotal evidences? To those, I would say, let's have some discernment when it comes to listening to these stories. I'm sure you guys exercise it in other ways, right? When someone tells you that they've been abducted by aliens or that they've seen a ghost walk through their house, your first thought might not actually be that person saw a ghost. It might be they might have been hallucinating, or maybe they were dreaming. There are so many other valid explanations for things like that. It's this line of reasoning, and it's something that I've been trying to use more in my critical thinking process, which is simply what is more likely. Is it more likely that someone saw a ghost at the end of their bed? Or is it more likely that they were experiencing sleep paralysis? With things that are hard to prove or disprove if we didn't get it on camera, or if we can't measure it in some way, one of the best tools that we can use is our own discernment. There are so many different religions in the world. There are different ways that people experience and practice spirituality. For Christians to completely do away with everyone else's experiences and anecdotal evidences and yet hold fast to their own, I think is quite intellectually dishonest. Especially when Christians try to explain these things as, well, that person didn't actually experience a different deity, they experienced a demon. You're using one unsubstantiated claim to try and disprove another unsubstantiated claim. Let's get back to prayer. Why doesn't it work? I would say that the majority of things that I prayed for didn't come into being, and the things that did couldn't be proven that it wasn't just me self-fulfilling what I wanted. Again, what's more likely? Something not miraculous, at least. The Bible gives a few reasons as to why prayer might not work, and I'm going to read those out to you now and then we'll talk about them. Jeremiah 29:12 says, "Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you." So this is the classic, God is always listening. I mean, how can he not? He's everywhere, right? God is always listening, but he doesn't always answer. That's one quick answer as to why prayer doesn't work. He works in mysterious ways. He just didn't answer you this time, but he was listening. This is easy for Christians to throw around because there's no way to prove or disprove whether God is listening to you. Like, that when someone listens to you, you're not impacted by that at all. If you were acting, you'd be able to see it. But because he's just listening, you can't. 1 Peter 3:12 says, "For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil." So this one places the blame on you directly. Basically, you're not good enough for God to answer your prayer. Why would he answer your prayer when you are evil and sinful? This is, again, an easy answer to give back because God doesn't have to explain himself. You know you're evil. You know you're not righteous enough. So the blame is placed on you, and instead of being angry at God for being all loving and all knowing and not answering your prayer, you are upset at yourself for not being good enough for him to answer your prayer. But let's think back to that last verse that we read a few moments back, where Jesus said that fathers here on earth give their children good gifts, even though they're evil. So even though we're evil, we're still able to give pretty good gifts to our kids. So how much more can God give us if he is perfect and merciful and loving? Well, not much more, apparently. Because I have proof that my dad has given me really good things in life. But again, I don't have much proof. I don't have any proof that God has given me good things in my life. I don't know if I've just got good things in my life because my ancestors have worked hard for me to be in a place where I am today, because I'm lucky enough to be living in one of the most well-off countries in the world. I mean, once you start getting into this, you're like, well, God's given me a lot of good gifts, but he's kind of been sleeping on like the majority of his children. So how do you then justify that some kids are born in incredibly impoverished households? Maybe they have greater faith than I do. I mean, I can certainly say that there are a lot of atheists in very good positions in life, and a lot of Christians who are in very terrible, poor conditions in life. So where are the good gifts? So maybe we'll explain those good gifts as being gifts of peace and, above material things. Material things are good, food's good, but, it's not necessary, because even if you die and you have faith, you'll go to heaven. So, even food's not really necessary to live a good life. It's not the best gift. The best gift is faith, right? Well, to that I say, sure, but then also this verse, Luke 12:22-34. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. Life is more than food, and body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow nor reap, they have no storeyard or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than the birds? Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the lilies grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it, for the pagan world runs after such things, and your Father knows that you need them. Seek first the kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well." That last line to me is the most important line, because Jesus talks about how it's more important to have faith, it's more important to follow God, to not worry, to chase after the treasures in heaven rather than the treasures on earth, as the pagans do, for example. But then he ends it with, if you're seeking the kingdom, if you are devoting your life to God, then you will get food and you will get clothes. God will provide those to you. He provides it to the birds, he's going to provide it to you. I don't know about you, but that seems like a very big claim to make, and you would expect that if Jesus, who claims to be God, told his followers that you would see poverty diminish. You would see people miraculously gaining clothes or food. Or maybe you're thinking of that nice little story, kind of like the Footprints one, right, of the guy who is caught in a flood and he sends away the boat and he sends away the car and he sends away the helicopter and he ends up drowning because he says that God's going to save him. And then the punchline is that God sent you the car and the boat and the helicopter. All this seems to me is we don't see miracles happening, but you still believe that God must be answering prayer. So instead of calling things out like they are, like the man drove the car or the doctor saved the person, we say that God did it through them. But then why do we need God? Why do we need to pray? Because atheist doctors are still going to be working around the clock to save people with or without a faith in God. I doubt God is possessing them and moving their limbs and making them save people. They're doing that on their own volition. Saying that God is working through them is interesting to me, because it's like, well, that's great, but how about we just let them do their thing, and God, you do that miraculous thing with things that we can't fix, like terminal cancers, for example. How about you leave to us what we can do in our evilness, stitching up wounds and whatnot, and you do all the other stuff that we can't do, like bringing people back to life, since that's what you said that you can do, and you said that Christians can do that too. Why aren't we seeing that? Why is God working through doctors? Why isn't he just working in the ways that we need a God to work? So to me, faith is very much a confirmation bias experience. So there's kind of like two options here, right? Either you grew up as a Christian and you were taught that God was real. So then by extension of believing that God is real, you talk to him, prayer. And you're also told through the leaders in your church and through the Bible that God answers your prayers. And because you already believe in God, you then filter everything through that when it comes to prayer. So if he doesn't answer your prayer, it's something to do with you, or it's just not his will to cure that person of a terminal illness. Or he does answer prayer in that someone does get better, or you do get that new bike, or whatever it might be, and you go, God is good, he answers prayer. That's confirmation bias. You're not actually leaving any room for prayer to determine whether or not God exists, or the success of prayer to determine whether God actually answers prayers, whether they actually work. You just already assume that it does work and filter everything through that. The second one is similar, but obviously quite different as well. I have friends who were not Christian and then came to faith through what they believe to be a very spiritual experience, something that they can't explain any other way. And to that, again, I would say, what makes your experience more valid than Muhammad's experience, seeing Gabriel in the cave, or anyone else who has a different religion to you and has a spiritual experience, telling them that that is the true religion. When it comes to prayer, when it comes to spiritual experiences, things that we can't substantiate, it all comes down to just your bias on religion to determine whether you think your experience is the correct one and theirs is the one from a demon. I don't actually know many Christians who have looked into other religions and taken seriously the claims of other religions, because they just assume that Christianity is the correct one. Personally, for me, prayer became a very frustrating experience, because the more that I thought about it and the more that I critically looked at, I guess, input and then output when it came to prayer, made me realize that the things I was praying for weren't coming true, which then just made me frustrated at God, because he's all loving, he's all knowing, he can do whatever he wants. And it says in the Bible that he wants to give good gifts to his children, so why isn't he doing that? There were a few really emotionally hard things that I went through, or saw people that I loved go through, and seeing the ineffectiveness of prayer, particularly when it came to seeing people I loved going through incredibly difficult illnesses and not coming out of them, it just made me really question if someone was actually listening. And not just someone, but someone who was meant to be all loving. This is when people will use God works in mysterious ways, or God uses the bad things to glorify himself. And to that I say, I don't want to worship someone who uses the deaths of children to bring glory to himself. I'm sorry, but that's just not the kind of person that I want to worship, especially when he can get that glory any way he chooses, and he chooses to do it through evil. That's just not, I'm just not here for it. I'm not there. It's not my gig. I would see privileged Christians go, God gave me a house, or God's blessed us with a trip to Europe, and all I could think was, I wish he would cure me of my anxiety or anything else other than give you a trip to Europe. Like, that's not necessary. When you are privileged and when you experience a lot of good in your life, of course you're going to be praising God a lot, right? But again, there are so many people suffering in this world who are praying to the exact same God and not getting food, let alone trips to Europe. Hey guys, it's Editing Naomi here. I realized there was just like one more little thing that I wanted to add, and that's that people say that prayer is a way to talk to God and converse with God. And to that, I will say, sure, like you can talk to him, but why doesn't he talk back? Okay, that's it. That's all I wanted to say. When I was a Christian, I used to think that people who didn't believe in God would be riddled with anxieties because they couldn't bring their worries to God in prayer, because they didn't have a purpose for their life because of so many different things. I was convinced that non-Christians were living really difficult lives and experiencing a lot of issues due to their disbelief in God. But to my surprise, I have been the least anxious in my life than I have ever been, because I'm no longer trying to justify why bad things happen in the world. Bad things happen because people are shit, and just because hurricanes happen. It's not because God has decided to put us on this earth and we're all awful human beings and he is punishing us and then using that punishment to bring glory to himself. I don't know about you, but that used to give me major anxiety. And the other thing is that I now have agency over my own life. I no longer have to worry if I've heard God correctly. I don't have to worry if I'm making the right decision. Maybe I'm not on the right path. Maybe God doesn't want me to be doing this. I just sort of make decisions now. I'm like, well, pros and cons, write up a list. And that's how I make decisions. And I know that if there's a problem and I can fix it, then I can do it. And if there's a problem and I can't, then I can't. It's just so much simpler now, whereas before there was just this whole extra layer, and it constantly had me questioning whether I was good enough, or again, why a loving God would let bad things happen. That just plagued me. I couldn't shake it. And I honestly don't know how Christians let that go. If you're a Christian, how do you let that go? I don't know. Lastly, instead of thanking God for good things, now I thank people for good things, because if someone gets healthier after being sick, it was probably their doctor. If I get a job, I'm not thanking God, I'm thanking myself, and I'm thanking the person who's given me the job. I give thanks where thanks is due. I don't want to be thanking someone who I don't have any evidence actually helped in any way, shape or form. If God needs to work through people, then you can kind of just take God out of the equation, because people are fine doing these things on their own. Alright, I think that is where I'm going to leave it. I really hope I didn't offend anyone, but I'm sure that I have, and again, I'm sorry. These are my personal opinions, these are my personal experiences and translations of the Bible, and I know that lots of different people have different ways of interpreting these things and justifying them for themselves. Again, please, let's have a civil discussion down below. That's it. Let me know what you would like for next video, and I hope you guys are staying safe and healthy. Pray if that helps you feel less anxious about things, but also please just wash your hands, don't go to church, and stay inside. Okay, bye.